Hello and welcome. Let's begin with Australia enforces sanctions on Israeli settlers. Philippines scrambles to contain oil spill after tanker capsizes. US and Canada intercept Russian Chinese jets near Alaska. Trump labels Harris radical in rally post-Biden exit, and Biden says he exited race to unite nation and defend democracy. Stay with me for these and more stories. Australia has enforced sanctions and travel bans on Israeli settlers in accuses of violent crimes against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. On Thursday, Penny Wong, Foreign Minister, announced the sanctions directed at 7 Israeli settlers and a hardline settler group known for setting up new illegal outposts. The group Hilltop Youth incites and perpetrates violence against Palestinians, said Wong, while the sanctioned settlers have committed beatings, sexual assault and torture. Wong said in a statement, "We call on Israel to hold perpetrators of settler violence to account and to cease its ongoing settlement activity, which only inflames tensions and further undermines stability and prospects for a two-state solution." The Australian government step follows similar actions by its allies, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada and Japan. The US, a steadfast supporter of Israel, on June 11th announced a new wave of sanctions against many Israeli settlers and a far-right Israeli nationalist group, Lehava. US Department of State spokesperson Matthew Miller said at the time the United States remains deeply concerned about extremist violence and instability in the West Bank, which undermines Israel's own security. "We strongly encourage the government of Israel to take immediate steps to hold these individuals and entities accountable." Israel's embassy in Canberra condemned violent acts against Palestinian communities following Australia's announcement. Israeli settlers' violence and military attacks in the occupied West Bank have surged during Israel's war on Gaza, killing at least 589 Palestinians since October 7th, according to Palestinian officials. Over the same period, at least 17 Israelis, including soldiers, have been killed in attacks in the territory involving Palestinians, according to official Israeli figures. Australia considers Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory illegal and an obstacle to peace. A Philippine-flagged tanker carrying 1.4 million liters of industrial fuel has capsized off the coast of the Philippines' capital, Manila, resulting in the disappearance of one crew member and causing fears of the worst oil spill in the country's history. James Bautista, Transportation Secretary, said 16 of the 17 crew members were rescued after the MTT Renova went down on Thursday morning amid heavy rains and rough seas choked by Typhoon Gaemi. A search is underway for the missing sailor. He added that there is already an oil spill, but strong winds and high waves were hindering a response. The Philippine Coast Guard said an aerial survey showed an oil slick extending around 3.7 kilometers, 2.3 miles, in the busy waterway and being driven by strong waves. Rear Admiral Armando Baililo, the spokesperson for the Philippine Coast Guard, said, and I quote, "We are racing against time and we will try to do our best to contain it immediately and stop the fuel from leaking. If all the fuel carried by the ship were to leak, it could become the worst oil spill in the country's history," he said. The waters where the ship sank are close to Manila, he noted, adding that there was a big danger the spill could reach the capital. "That's part of the contingencies that we are preparing for." Meanwhile, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Philippine president, has ordered the Environment Ministry to assess the damage, and the government said the ministry's chief was on her way to the coastal town closest to where the ship capsized. A probe is also underway to find out if the sinking is connected to Typhoon Gaemi, which on Wednesday flooded swaths of the capital Manila and surrounding towns. At least 14 people have died from the typhoon and monsoon rains, according to government data, and officials said the toll could go up. LSEG Econ's data shows Terra Nova has a deadweight tonnage of 1,415 tons and was headed to the central province of Iloilo. Last year, oil tanker MT Princess Empress was carrying around 800,000 liters of industrial fuel when it capsized on February 28th and eventually sank, triggering an oil spill that took 3 months to clean up and hit tourist towns. Now, the United States and Canada stopped 2 Chinese bombers and 2 Russian bombers operating in international airspace close to the state of Alaska, the North American Aerospace Defense Command NORAD has said. U.S. and Canadian warplanes detected, tracked and intercepted 2 Russian Tu-95 and 2 PRC H-6 military aircraft within Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ, on Wednesday, NORAD said. Russia's Ministry of Defense confirmed on Thursday the Russian and Chinese military planes conducted a joint air patrol in the northern part of the Pacific Ocean for over 5 hours. At the separate stages of the route, the aviation group was escorted by fighter jets of foreign countries, the ministry said in a statement. The joint air strategic patrols took place over the Bering Sea according to an annual military engagement plan, a spokesperson for China's Ministry of Defense said. Zhang Zhonggang said the patrol deepened strategic mutual trust and coordination and did not aim any third parties, saying it had nothing to do with the present international situation. NORAD noted that the aircraft did not enter U.S. or Canadian sovereign airspace and were not considered a threat. The binational command said in a statement NORAD will continue to monitor competitor activity near North America and meet presence with presence. Intercepting an aircraft is military speak for contacting a foreign aircraft by electronic or visual means. Countries including the US, China, India and Japan have unilaterally declared ADIZ that needed foreign military aircraft to identify themselves upon entering a specific zone of airspace. Unlike sovereign airspace, ADIZ are not recognized in international law or overseen by any international body. Russian military activity is not uncommon off Alaska's coast. NORAD said it had detected 4 Russian warplanes operating in the Alaska ADIZ in February. On Sunday, Moscow said it had scrambled fighters to intercept 2 U.S. bombers that approached the Russian border over the Barents Sea in the Arctic region. On U.S. 2024 election, Donald Trump, ex-United States president, has unveiled a torrent of attacks casting his rival Kamala Harris as a left-wing extremist, claiming the de facto presidential nominee for the Democratic Party has been the ultra-liberal driving force behind Joe Biden's policies. The Republican nominee said Harris will be the most left-wing occupant of the White House 10 times if elected in November. In his first public campaign event since Biden 81 exited the presidential race and endorsed his vice president. If you want socialist healthcare, nation-wrecking inflation, the death of American energy, and a lying radical left liberal San Francisco extremist as your commander-in-chief, then Kamala Harris is your candidate, Trump said on Wednesday at a campaign rally in Charlotte, North Carolina. The former president, who continually mispronounced Harris's first name, said the vice president had been ranked the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate and made Senator Bernie Sanders, a self-described democratic socialist, look like a moderate. He singled out Harris's record on abortion and immigration in specific, claiming that she was in favor of the execution of babies and had overseen the deadly destruction of the U.S. border in her role as Biden's diplomatic lead tasked with liaising with Central American countries. Harris, a former prosecutor and attorney general in California, has accused Trump of backing a nationwide ban on abortion and wanting to take the country backwards to before many of our fellow Americans had full freedoms and rights. Trump, 78, had also accused Harris of deceiving the public about Biden's mental fitness. Trump's superlative-laden address came as Harris, 59, hit the campaign trail as the de facto Democratic nominee after locking down the lion's share of delegates ahead of next month's national convention. Following weeks of chaos over Biden's faltering candidacy, Harris's elevation has injected fresh energy into the race, with donors promising record contributions and many polls showing her improving on the president's performance against Trump. However, Harris still trails Trump in the majority of polls carried out since Biden's exit and faces questions about her appeal among the general electorate after a political career mostly spent in heavily Democratic California. Still sticking with U.S. 2024 election, Joe Biden, United States president, has made his first public address since bowing out of his re-election bid, saying he pulled out of the race against Republican challenger Donald Trump to unite his party and save country's democracy. On Wednesday, the 81-year-old politician hit a somber tone as he sat behind the resolute desk at the Oval Office of the White House and announced that it was time to pass the torch to younger voices. The decision, which Biden first announced on Sunday, followed weeks of pressure from top allies in the Democratic Party after his halt in performance against Trump in late June. His withdrawal has upended the already unprecedented race and thrust Vice President Kamala Harris into the spotlight as the Democratic Party's heir apparent to take on Trump in November. Biden did not mention Trump during his address, but it was clear that the Democratic incumbent was referring to the ex-president when he said the future of the country's democracy was at stake in the upcoming election. The U.S. was at an explosion point, he said, adding that the upcoming months will determine the fate of our nation and the entire world. Biden said his record as president, our leadership in the world, my vision for America's future all merited a second term, but that he was pulling out of the presidential race to unite his party and win the November election. Biden took a moment to thank Harris, who has endorsed to be the Democratic presidential candidate. He said it will be up to Americans to make the choice come November. In an apparent rebuke of Republican calls to resign, Biden said he will spend the rest of his term focused on doing his job as president, adding that he will continue to work for Supreme Court reform and rally support for Ukraine and end Israel's war on Gaza. Biden closed his address by describing his time as president, privilege of my life. Away from U.S. 2024 election, now on Israel-Gaza war, Israel shrinking Gaza safe zones. 83% of the Gaza Strip has been marked unsafe for Palestinian civilians by the Israeli military as of Monday, according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. This big chunk of the beleaguered enclave has either been designated as a no-go zone by Israel or people there have been issued evacuation orders. While the remaining 17% is not subject to evacuation orders, residents in Gaza say no place is safe as Israeli attacks throughout the Strip have continued for over 9 months. More than 39,000 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of Israel's most recent assault on October 7th. Nearly all Palestinians in Gaza have been displaced from their homes, some even several times. Whole neighborhoods in northern Gaza, where Israel's offense started, have been destroyed. So-called safe zones in southern Gaza continue to shrink and deteriorate. On Monday, the Israeli military ordered the residents of the eastern part of Khan Younis to evacuate further west in the Al-Mawasi evacuation zone. The military claimed that the Palestinian group Hamas was embedded in the area. Less than an hour after the evacuation order, the Israeli military launched artillery and airstrikes on the area, killing at least 70 people, according to Gaza's health officials. Prior to the evacuation order, the area in Khan Younis was considered a humanitarian area. According to the United Nations, the evacuation order forced closely 150,000 Khan Younis residents out of their homes to areas with little or no infrastructure. Monday's evacuation order did not only include Khan Younis, but also about 8.7 square kilometers, 3.4 square miles of Al-Mawasi, which is west of Khan Younis in the southern Gaza Strip, shrinking the so-called safe zone by about 15%. In early December 2023, the area was first designated as a safe zone by Israel. The step was broadly criticized by legal and humanitarian experts. World Health Organization (WHO) Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus believes this is a recipe for disaster, cautioning that cramming a large number of people in a small area with limited infrastructure would significantly surge health risk for those seeking shelter. While the Israeli army originally deemed Al-Mawasi a permanent safe zone, the humanitarian zone in the area has changed several times and the military has attacked Al-Mawasi repeatedly. Israeli warplanes attacked Al-Mawasi on July 13, killing 90 people and wounding 300 displaced Palestinians, according to Gaza's Ministry of Health. 2 attacks took place in late June, 1 in May and 1 in February. Still on Israel-Gaza war, Netanyahu calls Gaza war critics Iran's useful idiots. In an address to Congress on Wednesday, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, lashed out against protests of Israel's ongoing war against Hamas in Gaza, widely disparaging anti-Israel protesters as Iran's useful idiots. Netanyahu's address to Congress comes at a critical crossroads for the war. U.S. officials have voiced optimism about the prospect of a deal that could free Hamas-held hostages and bring the conflict to an end. It also comes as several on the left have become increasingly dissatisfied with the way Netanyahu has waged the war, which has killed over 39,000 Palestinians and left Gaza in the grips of a humanitarian catastrophe. The Israeli Prime Minister's close-hour-long address to Congress hit an aggressive tone as he promised to fight until we achieve victory. Netanyahu forcefully downplayed and deflected on the role of Israel in causing the ongoing civilian strife in Gaza. Although he made some reference to efforts to bring the hostages home, significantly more of the speech focused on the ongoing war and took targets at his foes, Iran, the International Criminal Court, and protesters. The U.S. has seen protests across the country on college campuses and elsewhere in opposition to the war against Hamas. On the day of Netanyahu's speech, there were protests both outside and inside the U.S. Capitol complex. Additionally, the Secret Service is probing reports that protesters gained access to the hotel building where Netanyahu is staying in Washington, D.C., releasing bugs in the hotel and pulling fire alarms, according to a source familiar with the matter. Netanyahu painted protesters with a broad brush, claiming that many choose to stand with evil and that they stand with Hamas and rapists and murderers. While Netanyahu profoundly criticized protests against the war, both President Joe Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken have affirmed the right to protest and show they believe pro-Palestinian protesters have legitimate grievances, while still criticizing rhetoric that has devolved into anti-Semitism. Speaking at a news conference in April, Blinken said he understands the strong, passionate feelings people have about the bloodshed in Gaza. Biden, who has continually faced pro-Palestinian protests at his public events this year, often appears conciliatory toward those interrupting him. In his address to Congress, Netanyahu referenced a recent statement from U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines that Iran is attempting to covertly stoke protests in the U.S. related to the conflicts in Gaza. In her statement, Haines said, however, that she wanted to be clear that I know Americans who participate in protests are in good faith expressing their views on the conflict in Gaza, adding that this intelligence does not indicate otherwise. Coming to African scenes, Kenya, Ruto nominates Odinga allies to cabinet. On Wednesday, Kenyan President William Ruto named 4 ministers from the major opposition party in a bid to form a broad-based government. Hassan Joho was nominated as Cabinet Secretary for Mining, Blue Economy and Maritime Affairs. Wycliffe Oparanya was designated as Cabinet Secretary for Cooperatives, John Badi at the National Treasury Ministry and Opio Wandai at Energy. The 4 politicians were part of a batch of 10 nominees. They are close allies of Orange Democratic Movement leader. This comes despite a warning by the party's leader, Raila Odinga. Last week, in his first batch of appointees, Kenya's president retained 6 former cabinet ministers. Protesters on social media accused the opposition of treason, some alleging a secret deal was brokered. The nominees still need to get the green light by Parliament. The weeks of chaos in East Africa's economic hub have led to dozens of deaths, the firing of most cabinet members, and calls for Ruto's resignation. Protests started with Kenyans rejecting a proposed bill to enforce more taxes, as millions in the country barely get by amid rising prices. We go on a short break, and when we come back, I'll bring you more stories, particularly from Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. You're welcome back. Now, stories from Nigeria. We begin with governors, ministers to meet in a bit of that hunger protest. The federal government says it is open to negotiations with the leaders of the planned nationwide protest slated for August 1st to 10th. On Wednesday, at an emergency meeting in Abuja, all the federal ministers were also directed to visit their respective states between Wednesday and Thursday, August 1st, when the protests are planned to begin. This is as select ministers were also to meet with state governors at the 143rd session of the National Economic Council and the Council Chamber of the Asura Villa in Abuja on Thursday. These form part of the action points from the emergency meeting between the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, George Akume, and all ministers in Abuja on Wednesday morning. According to reports on Tuesday evening, special advisors to the President on Policy and Coordination, Ms. Hadiza Bala Usman, Information and Strategy, Bayo Onanuga, and former Minister of Youth and Sports, Sunday Dare, were among those invited for the meeting convened to discuss the planned nationwide protest. The meeting came amid calls for nationwide protest from August 1st to 10th against the rising cost of living and the harsh conditions as Africa's most populous country faces what has been described as its worst economic headwinds in a generation. The protest tagged #EndBadGovernance has gained traction on social media and has been planned to hold across all 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. However, its organizers have remained widely anonymous as no group has come forward to take responsibility. President Tinubu announced an end to petrol subsidies, which he said will save the government monies for infrastructural expansion. He also unified the foreign exchange rates, curb currency arbitrage upon assuming office 14 months ago. However, these steps triggered a collateral slump in the value of the naira as food prices rose. Much so, widespread insecurity in many farming communities has displaced farmers, contributing to higher food prices. NEC, a statutory body mandated to advise the President on nation's economic affairs, comprises the Vice President, governors of the 36 states of the Federation, Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Minister of Finance, and other stakeholders. The August 1st protest comes on the heels of similar demonstrations in Kenya, which experts say Nigerians may have drawn inspiration from. And finally, on the news, Dangote could disrupt 90 European refineries. Dangote Petroleum Refinery will possibly put pressure on no less than 90 European refineries, which are at risk of shutting from intensified competition, according to reports. For decades, European refiners have enjoyed a lucrative market in Nigeria as an unreliable power supply from the national grid forces companies across Africa's fourth biggest economy to depend heavily on imported refined products with a net value of $17 billion yearly. According to report, traders and shipping data showed Nigeria's latest Dangote refinery is adding gas oil exports to West Africa, capturing market share from European refiners. Andon Pavlov, an analyst at Clapper, a World Trade Intelligence platform, said in a note as much as 300 to 400,000 barrels per day of refining capacity in Europe is at risk of closure because of rising global gasoline production. In May, Clapper's data disclosed that European Union and UK gas oil exports to West Africa fell to a 4-year low of 29,000 per barrel in May, while Russian exports to the region dropped to an 8-month low of 87,000 bpd in the same month. Analysts say European refineries' loss of market share to Lagos-based Dangote refinery will be problematic for them. The loss of West African market will be problematic for a small set of refineries that do not have the kits to upgrade their gasoline to European and US specification. Eugene Lindell, head of refined products of FGE, a global energy consultancy, said, referring to more stringent environmental standards for other markets. This development is coming on the heels of Aliko Dangote, president of Dangote Group's dispute with regulatory authorities in Nigeria's oil sector over the supply of crude oil to his 650,000 barrels capacity oil refinery and the quality of products from the country. To date, Dangote has exported 6 cargoes of jet fuel / kerosene, all of which were delivered to Senegal, Togo, or Ghana. Organization Petroleum Exporting Countries OPEC said in its latest monthly oil market report for For June 2024, upside potential for higher production levels from Nigeria's Dangote refinery, coupled with strong flows from the Middle East and new supplies from the Mexican's Olmeca refinery, will likely exert pressure on Northwest Europe gas oil performance in the midterm. S&P Global Commodity Insights projected that when the 650,000 Dangote refinery increases refining activities, it could lessen West Africa's dependence on import of petrol from Europe by as much as 290,000 BBD, making it a dominant supplier in the sub-region. S&P described the ongoing level of downstream activities as a flux, stressing that the Dangote refinery may also reduce the amount of cargo that often sits off the coast of West Africa. Another look at the major stories. Australia enforces sanctions on Israeli settlers. Philippines scrambles to contain oil spill after tanker capsizes. US-Canada intercepts Russian-Chinese jet near Alaska. Trump labels Harris radical in rally post-Biden exit, and Biden says he exited race to unite nation and defend democracy. That's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.